Okay, hi everyone. I am Shannon Stenberg with OCLC. I just wanted to say welcome to the International Dewey Users Group meeting. For the first time, we are recording this session on WebEx, and we will be sharing it afterwards for everyone in the room, as well as anyone that registered for this meeting. Today, we are just want to give you a few housekeeping notes, and then I will pass it over to Alex Kyrios, who will be doing the presentation. So if anyone has any questions, please make sure you are loud enough for the presenter to hear. We'll make sure that we have a microphone as well so that we can repeat the question into this WebEx. Additionally, if there is anything that you need us to stop, please raise your hand and we'll make sure we can address that as well. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Alex, who will go ahead and begin the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can you see this slide? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Look at the slides. Don't look at me. Good morning, everyone. Good evening here from Washington, D.C. My name is Alex Kyrios. I am one of the Dewey editors. I've been on the team for several years now, and I will be speaking a bit about updates from the Dewey world, both for the classification itself and for Dewey as a team. I will also be introducing someone, our new editor, as part of my slides. Then you will be hearing from Caroline Saccucci from the Library of Congress, who will tell you about how Library of Congress Dewey classifiers work with us, the Dewey editors. Then you'll hear about the European DDC Users Group meeting from EDUG Secretary and Chair Elise Conradi and Harriet Aagaard. And finally, some technical updates about WebDewey from Peter Werling of Pansoft. And I will let all of them introduce themselves when they get to their presentations. So this is me. This is a license plate that I used to have on a car that told the whole world that I am a fan of DDC, of Dewey. I think it impressed people when I first interviewed to be a Dewey intern. So our first piece of news from the Dewey team, as many of you may have heard, Rebecca Green, our longtime senior editor, retired after almost 11 years of service with the Dewey team. She retired at the end of June, although she continues to work with us on a consulting basis. She is finishing some proposals for Dewey on the areas of her expertise, including linguistics and religious studies. And she will be joining the editorial policy committee at its next meeting to present some of those, and we're glad that we will have her for one more meeting. Many of you, I think, have had the chance to meet Rebecca over the years, and I'm sure you know how knowledgeable she is and how pleasant she is to work with. So we are sorry to see her go, but wish her a very happy retirement. Because of Rebecca's retirement at the end of June is usually when we would have our full annual meeting of the Dewey Editorial Policy Committee, our international committee of Dewey users that votes on proposals to the classification. But with Rebecca retiring and with a new editor coming in, we decided to move that meeting to October to give the editorial team time to prepare a full agenda for that meeting as we said farewell to Rebecca and welcomed Violet Fox. Violet is our newest Dewey editor, and I am going to let her introduce herself. She is, I am here at my home, my apartment, and she is at the Dewey offices at the Library of Congress. So Violet, I'm going to send this over to you.
Great. So I am Violet Fox. It's so nice to meet everyone virtually. I've previously worked in cataloging and metadata at the University of Illinois in Chicago and at St. John's University in central Minnesota. And I received my MLIS at the University of Washington in 2013. So my professional interests include exploring the ethical implications of classification and empowering library users. And then, I'm particularly interested in ethics of classification. One of the ways that I think we can make classification more representative is to get more people involved in thinking about the structures that we use in libraries, and to get more people to have input in the words that we use. So one of my personal projects has been the creation of the Cataloging Lab, which is a wiki where people can collaborate together to propose changes to Library of Congress subject headings. My two main goals with that have been to affect positive change in the classification systems that we use, but also to make sure that I brought other people along with me. I want to ensure that if people are interested in making changes to these systems, that they have the know-how to make it happen. Which is why I'm so excited to be a new part of Dewey and to be helping out with building our community engagement efforts. It's important to me to try to increase the transparency of the editorial work that's being done, making sure that people know what the editors do, what the editorial policy committee does, and most importantly, making the case for why what we do is important. One of the things I'll be presenting to the EPC meeting this October for consideration is an exhibit to talk about making the work that the editors present to the EPC publicly accessible, so everyone knows what we're working on and the kind of considerations that we make when we're proposing changes to DDC. And then part of opening up our work will involve getting input on prioritizing editorial work from practicing librarians so that we know which part of the schedules that need work are impacting users in the most significant ways and which sections should be the focus of our editorial efforts. But by far the largest part of the community engagement efforts will be providing pathways for users to contribute to editorial efforts. This is really very exciting. We're looking forward to working together with subject matter experts and librarians. One of our big goals this year is to think about what those efforts might look like and to have a few trial pilots in progress by next year. And of course, we're doing all of the above with an eye towards ensuring a truly international perspective for the sake of all of our users. And I'd like to encourage everyone in the room to please feel free to get in touch with me or the rest of the editors if you're interested in being a part of our pilot efforts. And with that, I want to thank everyone for the warm welcome, and I'll turn it over to Alex.
All right, so can everyone can see me again? Okay, my slides. I mentioned that the annual meeting of the Dewey Editorial Policy Committee was pushed until October, but we have still been busy. The committee has still been busy. For many years now, we've had a tradition of electronic meetings, and in this case, we have had 2 electronic meetings since EPC last met in person in June, and there have been some important changes to the classification that have been approved at those meetings that I wanted to review with you. Almost all of these are live in WebDewey now. A few of them we are still working to go in, so this will be a combination of changes that are already in place and a few that are still to come in the next few weeks and months. So the first of these electronic meetings was held from October to November of last calendar year, and then we had one from January to March. The editors participated participated in that, as well as the members of the editorial policy committee. So whenever I give these presentations and talk about changes to the classification, I will often skip over some of these ones that are really about our own rules and how we present Dewey information in the introduction. But as many of you know, the introduction is still very important, and this one I thought was worth clarifying. In the introduction, we talk about the different types of notes that we use throughout the classification, and we talk about notes that have hierarchical force, which means a note at one number will apply to subordinate numbers. We talk about some notes that do not have hierarchical force, but previously it was not really clear which of those categories the do not use note fell under. Do not use notes, of course, are a fairly common note where we say that a standard subdivision cannot be used in a certain area. So here we have an example of standard subdivision 03 for dictionaries, encyclopedias, and concordances. Just for example, here at the Bible, we have this do not use note for that standard subdivision. And sometimes we would say that these notes did have hierarchical force, sometimes not. What we mean is this, and the change that we made was to make sure that this is clear in the introduction, that when we have a do not use note in a place like this, it does not mean that you cannot use 03 in other places in the 220s about the Bible. It does mean that you cannot use subordinate notation from Table 1, such as 032 at this number either. So whether that has hierarchical force depends on which part of the hierarchy you're talking about, but the examples that we've included now in the introduction and how we have laid that out, I think, helps address that confusion. We had a request from a Library of Congress classifier at one point last year about providing notation for torture, which was not very clear where this went in the classification. So we had found an easy place for it in the 360s for social science, but EPC was not really sure about where it should go in the 170s for works on the ethics of torture. And what we ended up doing is continuing it from 179.7, respect and disrespect for human life. We considered putting it at 172.2, where ethics of government are, since governments are often the bodies sort of enacting torture. We didn't like the idea that we would list torture at a place called duties of the state, suggesting that a state should do such things. We considered changing that caption instead, but put it with respect and disrespect for human life, where issues such as capital punishment are. Next, we had a distinction between the history, geographic treatment, biography of criminology, and criminology as a discipline. At least here in the US, these are very popular works about true crime, about famous historical criminals. We have here Jesse James from the American Wild West. But in general, we don't want to separate disciplines from the people involved sort of in that discipline. So we saw that this 364.9 notation was in greater use than 364.09, so we wanted to consolidate those together so criminals and criminologists go in the same place with some notes for specific classes that would go elsewhere. We heard a request for place for the human microbiome. This is the collective bacteria and microorganisms that live in the human body and do beneficial work. So this is not the bacteria or viruses that cause illness. We took the number for human physiology at 612 and the standard subdivision for microorganisms, fungi, and algae applied to a certain topic, and designated that as the place for comprehensive works on the human microbiome. But we also have notes about works on microbiota of a specific place of the human body and specific aspects of the human microbiome, such as works that compare harmful and beneficial microorganisms, for example. On a similar note, we've made development for probiotic foods. These are foods meant to encourage the growth of the helpful microorganisms in the human body. And we've also created a place where you can build numbers for work on the health aspects of specific foods. We give honey as the example in the schedules. We were also seeing works on seaweeds as foods, and there was not previously a clear place for those to go. So as we were working on this, we came up with provision for seaweeds as food as well. In child rearing in the 600s, we had a large series of do not use notes for Table 108 groups of people, and it was not necessarily clear what should go in those places or how to express child rearing for specific types of children or for specific types of caregivers. Just to use a very broad example, if you were using Table 108 notation for women, would you be talking about women caregivers or female children? That was not always very clear, so we replaced those do not use notes with a manual note showing users what can and cannot be expressed in that area. And there was also just notes to remind that the religious aspects of child rearing, religious instruction for children, would still belong in the 200s with religion. We also authorized a new class for vegan cooking. There was previously vegetarian cooking, but not vegan cooking. This work also gave a place for interdisciplinary works on vegetarianism, which might include ethical aspects and religious aspects, as well as just the food and the dietary aspects. We also defined the vegetarian diet in relation to variants such as pescatarianism, where vegetarians eat fish as well. And really what it comes down to is if a work is talking about vegetarian cooking, Dewey will not judge you if there are fish in there or if there is milk in there. For electronic games, this is an area that hadn't been updated in several editions. We were seeing many works on electronic games that we wanted to provide more detail for, similar to what we've done for films, for TV programs, as well as radio programs. We explored the option of using game genres such as adventure game or sports game, and we found, and EPC found, that in many cases those were difficult categories to assign. Sometimes the same game might be called different genres. So we decided to sort of follow the pattern that we had for films and TV programs with media. Those are numbers that get a lot of use as well. We also wanted to clarify how to treat games that are really just computerized or digital versions of games that are not inherent to computers, such as chess, with games that really only exist as electronic games, such as Mario. And this is something that we have seen in other topics, such as banking. We want to think about where we want to distinguish a topic from an electronic version of the topic, as more things such as banking or even cars become more computerized. We are keeping a close eye on that, and you can expect some future developments in that area. We also established a new area in the hierarchy for indoor games for fantasy sports. This is the sort of activity where you pick actual athletes or sportsmen and make teams of real players and have your outcomes affected by how those players do. It's not an actual sport. You know, if you play fantasy sports, that doesn't mean you are necessarily good at that sport. But we have allowed a span that builds from the numbers for individual sports in 796.3 to 796.9. In the US here, fantasy baseball and fantasy American football are very popular, but this span is not limited to those. You have fantasy soccer or association football as well as the example you can see here. And finally, we had a question about roadmaps. What belongs at 388.1 roads using standard subdivision 0223 maps, plans, diagrams versus 912. 912 used to have a much longer and wordy caption. This change has renamed it to maps and plans of the surface of the Earth and of extraterrestrial worlds, and add some do not use notes in places in the 380s, such as roads, to show where these maps and plans should go in the 900s instead. The essence of this is that we are treating bicycle paths or pedestrian paths really the same as roads and putting them together, especially because some of these roads or pathways are the same and used by different vehicles or even just pedestrians. So that is all for my updates. I don't know if we want to take questions now or take questions at the end. Can anyone over there help with that?
Hey, Alex, this is Shannon. Just want to let you know that we don't have any questions at the moment.
Great. I will, if Caroline is ready to go, just let me know when she is, and I will give up control here, and I will stay here in case there are questions later on.
Going to be
when I speak, it's going to be both from the cataloging and publication. Great, okay. Because I think about both cataloging, publication, and Dewey, so some of the things I say will be in relation to both, but mainly this talk will be about the Dewey work that I do. So the title of my presentation is Working Together, LC Classifiers and OCLC Dewey Editors. And I'm very honored to be asked to speak at this event, and I'm very happy to see all of you. I hope that this will be good for you. Okay, so partnership agreement. Many of you don't know that OCLC and the Library of Congress have a special agreement. That agreement basically stipulates, and it's a formalized agreement that the highest levels of management sign, that the LC classifiers can consult with OCLC editors, that the OCLC editors will actually be in the same working space next to the LC classifiers, and that the Library of Congress has a standing representative to the EPC, the Editorial Policy Committee that Alex talked about. And I'm the representative by a sort of a designated representative. Actually, Beecher Wiggins, who is the head of cataloging and acquisitions, is the official one, but I'm the one who's designated to go. So, and it's a great privilege and honor to do that. So the division of labor, if you will, is that the Library of Congress classifiers are assigning DDC to all the cataloging and publication titles. That's about between 60 and 70,000 titles a year that they assign Dewey numbers for. And they also assign all of the Dewey numbers to materials that come through from the Copyright Deposit Office workflow, and also from other areas in the library that process materials coming from countries that have languages in Western European languages. Predominantly Spanish and German, although there is some French and some Italian and Portuguese, but predominantly Spanish and German. And because we see the CIP titles, the cataloging publication is the newest material coming through because it hasn't even been published yet, we see the newest subject topics. And so we get the questions already thinking, where do we put the biography of Meghan Markle, who's now, of course, the Duchess of Sussex? Where are we going to put fake news? And in fact, the Library of Congress established the subject heading, the official subject heading, fake news. And of course, now we have we have all put it in 070.43, which reporting and news gathering is a very non-judgmental way of saying that news, but we'll go with that. And my comment here, Trump administration titles, of course, this is not any sort of political, this is just the fact that the president is there's books about the president, good and bad, and there's the number for him. So, of course, we're getting this material right before it's published. So the consultation is happening with each other, and when I say each other, there are 4 primary classifiers, plus I also have 2 part-time classifiers that also work heavily with the CIP program, and then we have a few other classifiers that are mainly catalogers doing materials, cataloging materials in predominantly literature areas, Class P material. And then we also have one who works with German material, and then all of the serials that are cataloged that need an ISSN assignment also are assigned Dewey numbers as well. So that the Dewey program is a little bit larger than just the LC classification team, but at any rate, they all consult with each other and with the editors. They cover the entire LC classification system. So, of course, the Library of Congress has its own classification system. The Dewey program is assigning the Dewey numbers for the benefit of the users outside the Library of Congress, because we don't use it, but it's a great benefit to public and school libraries predominantly. And in fact, at the Dewey breakfast, it's predominantly the school and public librarians who are coming to this meeting, so it's really interesting to see the international use of Dewey sort of sitting in the room. It's really nice. So each classifier has a discipline specialty, and for instance, I have one that does social sciences, I have one that does medical sciences, I have one that does humanities, and they are backing each other up at all times if one is away from the office. But predominantly, they have this discipline that they specialize in.
And so they're talking to each other. Something classed in HV, which in LC class is for the social sciences, usually criminology or something like that. But is it law? Or is it criminal justice? If it's criminal justice, it would have gone in HV, but if it was law, it would have gone in class K. Well, they're thinking about that in terms of Dewey. Which one does it apply to? Something that's classed in ML for music literature, is it about sound recordings in 780, or is it more about the recording industry? So these are the kind of questions. So even though something comes in a certain LC class, it doesn't mean that it's going to go there in Dewey, if you will, go in the place that it was assigned to in LC class. And then certain editors have specific expertise, and unfortunately the one with the expertise in linguistics is the one who's just retired. And fortunately we still have Dooley as our consulting editor, helping out specifically with the 800s, and that's one of her areas of expertise. Winton is our other consulting editor. He is a specialist with Table 2, and he's around to have questions. So we have them right there. We can just walk over and talk to them whenever we have these questions. And the classifiers are suggesting notation changes. So for instance, Alex talked about what the ones on torture. It was one of my classifiers who said, I'm seeing this is not working out. There has to be some better notation, better notes for this. He in particular is always giving Winton news about, oh, did you know that such and such just came out and the administration in Peru changed, or the administration in Kuala Lumpur or Malaysia changed, or so even if Winton hasn't had a chance to look at the news, excuse me, Mark is already on it. So a lot of the times it's my classifier saying this needs to be updated. So for instance, the new Prime Minister of Peru, and it's already showing in the classification. One of my other classifiers whose area is literature suggested that the sociolinguistics by language expansion was necessary, so that we could have, for instance, sociolinguistics of French in Quebec. That was one of, again, a suggestion from my staff, directly to either, usually, maybe perhaps by email, but often just sort of just walking down to the hall to talk to them. There are times when my classifiers are suggesting possible exhibits and other updates. So for instance, one of my newest classifiers is doing hard and physical sciences. And sonochemistry was not in WebDewey, and so that may be an exhibit that's going to be coming forward, where to put sonochemistry. Another, actually it's the same person, was trying to do something that was classifying material for about Puerto Rico, and noticed that the jurisdictions don't match the jurisdictions in Table 2. And the difficulty there is that Puerto Rico has its jurisdictions not by administrative county level, but by electoral district, which can change so frequently, and it's very difficult. And it doesn't match any of the editorial rules for how to define administrative level, so that can take some work. But that's something that is up to at the attention level now of the editors. Mesh headings, the medical science heading, medical science headings are not, when they're not in the relative index, so the editors may add those mappings. So for instance, I have my medical science classifier is receiving titles directly from the National Library of Medicine for classification. And not only does she add the Dewey number, she also assigns the Library of Congress classification, and there are only mesh headings, and there are no LC classification, there's no LC subject headings, only mesh headings. So it's an agreement that we've decided, because the Library of Congress itself does not collect clinical medicine, that we would go ahead and assign LC classification, but not LC subject headings. And if someone could in the future add LC subject headings to that, but for now, we always will add an LC class and a Dewey class. She's doing both. So she's using the classification web correlation searching to see how they relate to each other. And if the mesh headings are not in WebDewey, and she actually starts by adding the Dewey number first. So often we get, most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, something comes through, it already has LCSH, it already has LC class. A lot of the analysis are already been done, although my staff typically tend to reevaluate it to make sure that it actually, again, is it law, is it criminal justice. She has nothing except mesh headings. And if the mesh headings aren't in WebDewey, then she has difficulty doing her work. So adding those mesh headings and saying to the editors, can you please do this, helps her. Rhetoric is in the relative index, for instance, but we get texts for writing, creative writing, writing workshops, and those terms are not in the relative index. So we don't think in terms of rhetoric that way. So that's something that the editors may update the relative index to add those terms. Past exhibits that we've had, this sort of goes along with sort of the vegan cooking thing, but popular terms in society that need to be accounted for. So my classifier who was, again, doing the medical science, and also the classifier who works a lot with cookbooks, and so the one is dealing with things from the health perspective, the other is dealing with them from the cooking and cultural perspective. We're seeing things coming through the CIP program about gluten-free cooking, lactose-free cooking, or lactose-free living, gluten-free living, and there was no place for those. So 1 or 2 EPCs ago, I've lost track now, there was an exhibit that went out and expanded the notation for NRIs for X-free cooking and recipes so that those could be accounted for, and that came directly from work that my classifiers had. Seeing this work, and there was enough literary warrant to update the classification. Actually, one of the large ones that my staff, they weren't my staff at the time, this was, well, it was editions 20 to 22, but my staff has been around for that long that they were working on this, but it took 14 years to finalize the relocation of general and comparative religion from the 290s to 201 to 209, and that was editor and classifier working together to make these changes over a long period of time. So this relationship, well, of course, Dewey had been with the Library of Congress and then eventually moved to OCLC. So, but because they stayed together in the office as a division and then as a section, we've continued this long-term relationship, and so this ongoing work is possible. I get a lot of emails to the Dewey at lsd.gov account. Sometimes it's about, I don't know why you use that number. Sometimes it's, can you explain how I do this from a classification perspective? Sometimes it's an editorial question, which I can pass on to the editors. And I also get queries from the Ask a Librarian. Again, it depends on how the user has gotten to us. Queries to the Policy and Standards Division. Again, sometimes they're classification questions, sometimes they are more editorial. I've gotten handwritten letters from prisoners. Anytime I get a handwritten letter, usually in pencil, it's from a prisoner saying, I need help figuring out how to organize my collection. I'm working sort of managing our library collection, and how do I organize it? Which is very heartbreaking to receive those letters, but at the same time, it's, okay, it's definitely, you know, this is a user group and they need our help. And so sometimes, as I said, it's working with, I work with editors to answer those questions. If it's classification advice, again, it's going to my classifiers. Sometimes it's about historical practice, and I don't have historical practice knowledge. We have a website that includes some of the historical practice, but often I have to email Julie, who has a very long history of remembering how things were. So for instance, this is a very lengthy question, but it has to do with, there is a Dewey number that had an S, so it was DDC 220.7 S222. And it was in our bibliographic record, and the woman wanted to know, what's the S? I work in a small church library. How should I classify this volume? And I needed to go to Julie for this. It turns out that LC used to assign Dewey numbers for the series and for the volume. So the S was for the series number and the volume. So 222.7 was the series for the Cokesbury Bible commentary, but specifically Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther were supposed to be in 222. So I was able to answer that question, but again, this was historical practice that I just didn't have that knowledge. Maybe I should update the webpage for that information too, make sure it's up there. Auto-Dewey development was something that was a collaboration between the classifiers and the editors. And this is it was a project to find areas of the Library of Congress classification that was similar enough in terms of the way DDC also approached things, so that semi-automatic assignment of the DDC number based on the LC number was possible. And then it turns out that there are very few areas where this is possible. Poetry, drama, fiction, biography, and criticism about individual authors and many world literature. So not about world literature, not about multiple literatures, not about multiple genres. It has to be either a novel or poetry or a play or a group of plays or a group of novels or whatever by an author, individual. Could be anonymous, but still. So that's very limiting. It also is biography and criticism of them. So, I mean, it does help to broaden it out a bit, but again, it's very limited. And the same thing for athletes. And of course, athletes, that's a new one. That came out a couple of years ago. The mappings were developed by classifiers and editors, and the software is an in-house product that we use with our ILS Voyager database. So the way it works is the LC time periods are set out, so PQ 2600 to PQ 2651 is for the time period of French literature between 1900 and 1960. The DDC French literature number is 84. If it's poetry, drama, or fiction, a 1, a 2, or a 3 is added to the number. Then, since it's 1900 to 1960, it asks you, oh, well, actually in DDC, your choices are 1900 to 1945 or 1945 to 1999. Sometimes there's a 1-to-1 mapping. Sometimes there's a 1-to-2, depending on how the DDC divides the time. And so the way it works is that it will ask the cataloger, oh, okay, I see that you have the number 1952 is your LC number. And then it will say, it'll ask you, is it poetry, fiction, or drama? You say, okay, this is poetry. And the understanding behind it is that the person who's cataloging it is going to be assigning the Dewey number, not sending it to the Dewey section, because that way it's the easier stuff, and they can send us the harder stuff. That's the thought behind it. So it's going to be done by the LC cataloger, not the Dewey classifier. So they're asked the question, is it poetry, drama, or fiction? And then if there's a situation like with 2600 to 2651, where it's split between 2 time periods, it'll ask, is this 1900 to 1945 or 1945 to 1999? If the LC classification range is between 2660 and 2686, that's for a time period that is close enough to Dewey's time period that it doesn't ask you what the time period is. So once you answer the question, which time period, and it has to do with when they flourished, so usually it's easy enough to tell. But they can also look at the name authority file or the name authority record to see when this person flourished, or they can look at other titles that were assigned. And then it will provide the Dewey number. It'll just input the Dewey number. So the most they have to answer is 2 questions, and usually it's just 1 question they have. And usually that question is something they know. They know that they have a novel. They know that they have. There are 43 literatures across Europe and the Americas that have been worked on. And what I did was, we started with ones, I think, in the Latin American languages. And I added German, Russian, and some older Latin American literature time periods as well. So we only had the most modern. The thinking was that there would be fewer older, well, I think they were looking for low-hanging fruit, and the person who started it worked with Latin American and Romance language titles, so he started with those, but only had modern time periods, and we worked to add some older time periods, but also expand the literature, the number of languages this applied to. So I worked with Dooley on this one to expand this into more than, to have 43 literatures. The way the Auto-Dewey sports mapping works is that individual biographies of athletes are classed in the GB area for 22 specific sports. And the way this works is that there is a number for rugby, athletes in Dewey. There's a number for soccer athletes, but there's also a very specific number for LC class. So it's very easy to map the two. There are a few places where I think it's football, where it's either Australian or I'm trying to remember, it's Canadian and U.S. football. Is it that's the one that has you have to answer the question, and I think it's figure skating and speed skating. Also, it asks you, because ice skating is sort of where it fits in Dewey, so you have to, or rather, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe in LC there's ice skating, but in Dewey there's figures. Julie, is that the way it is? It's more general in LC and more specific in Dewey, so it asks you which one it is. But otherwise, it's a one-to-one mapping. And again, it asks you the question, and that's the only question it asks, is which sport it is. If it has that question. Otherwise, it knows exactly which LC class to map to Dewey. And it also adds the subfield B for biographies, since these are all biographies. And the reason why this is so useful is because the Library of Congress Cataloging and Publication Program gets a bazillion titles from publishers, usually children's publishers, where they do an entire series of every sports star. So we get LeBron James, and all your favorite basketball stars, all your favorite soccer stars, every imaginable sport that's sort of a main sport. And it seemed like a really easy way to just sort of get the Dewey numbers in there and not have to send it to the Dewey section and let us work on our harder stuff. So this was a great thing. And it led to some EPC exhibits, because there needed to be some clarifications and some expansions and so on for other areas of classification when my classifier started delving into it and seeing issues. So that was an extra benefit to this project. So we've instituted monthly large group meetings with the classifiers and the editors. And Jody DeRitter is oh gosh, what is her title? She's over the Dewey program under a sort of metadata frameworks area. And she has been really supportive of making sure that the editors and the classifiers are talking to each other in a way that is really meaningful and not just sort of, we moved from one space to, oh, yep, yeah, Alex. We moved from one space where everyone was sort of in a large room, and it was very easy to just walk to the cubicle, to a space where the classifiers are here, there's a bit of a hallway, and now the editors are here. So there was a little bit more effort required, I think, to have people talking. And so I thought it was really important to have us sitting together in a meeting and talking. And the first meeting was a little bit strained. We were actually focused. We had a focus to talk about the issues with the log out. We kept getting logged out, had to do something with a proxy server at LC. But that issue was sort of there, and it sort of spearheaded this conversation. And so now the conversation, it just sort of flows, and it's great. And they can talk about what they're working on. And this whole thing goes to the thing what Violet was talking about, with making sure we all know what we're all working on. It's really important. And sometimes classifiers don't know about anything until the EPC exhibit goes out. And, so yes, we can post the questions to them and they answer the questions, but it's not like we necessarily know what they're working on. And for the first time ever, my classifiers have been invited to come to the weekly editorial meetings and get the agenda and all the documents, so they can bring up, oh yeah, you know what, I've been seeing this in my cataloging work, and I have questions about this, or I have opinions about this, where in a much more free form, much more less formal, not in an email where there's like this separation, but in a meeting face to face, and we can all be benefiting from it. And it's been really, really beneficial. And there have been snacks, so that's been great. We're looking forward to continued collaboration. The new editor, Violet, we're very excited to have her in the office. She could have been sitting remote at home, or she could have been in Dublin, Ohio, but she chose to come to LC on site, so we were really excited that she's with us. We're looking forward to more cross-sharing because she's interested in community engagement. We're the community. So the communication channels are really open and having new ideas. So we're really excited about the future of the way things are going to go with Dewey. And for more information, you can go to our webpage so you can see some of the practices that we have, and I plan to update the one thing about the series. for historical information. And of course, you can always email me at dewey@loc.gov. I monitor that, and if you have questions about bibliographic records that you don't know why we assigned that Dewey number to it, or how did we come up with that number, that's a good place to go. And that's the Library of Congress in Twilight. So, thank you very much. Are there any questions at this point, or I'm happy to answer, or later if you have any questions. Great. Thank you.
Well, I think that the reason we didn't have any questions was that really you were very good at explaining. I learned a lot. Yes. Very good presentation. Let's see.
I am Elise Conradi,
And I'm Harriet Aagaard.
and we're here to present the European DDC User Group, because I think that we've been talking about EDUG for a long time, but we've never actually presented the group to this audience.
Perhaps some of you know, but I know that some of you know quite a lot, but perhaps not all of you.
So, EDUG was established in 2007 because there were more and more European translations of Dewey, and we found that it's necessary to create a group to work together to discuss some common problems that Europeans were experiencing with Dewey, because Dewey had traditionally had an American focus for about 100 years. And now we were finding there was a German translation, there was a French translation, Italian, Swedish, Norwegian, let's see, Spanish now, actually. And we were realizing that we would be stronger if we worked together to get our perspective into Dewey. So it was established in 2007, first of all, to have a forum to exchange experience with the use of Dewey. It was also, we also coordinate proposals for the development of Dewey, and in other words, that means we suggest changes that could be made to Dewey to reflect a European perspective. A lot of work was done, for example, in law and in education, because that was an area that really differed for most European countries than the American point of view. We also discussed development of techniques, applications, software, data models. We discussed the needs that our European institutions have that might not be the same in the United States. And this is especially the case because in Europe, most libraries that are using Dewey are national libraries, research institutions, academic institutions, compared to in the United States where it's primarily used for shelving in public libraries. So we have different needs that we were able to discuss at these meetings. And we also encourage and promote the cooperation of translations. And this has been an enormous help for everybody who's been involved in various translation projects. We're able to discuss difficulties we've had, suggestions we might have for improvements to software that Pansoft is able to provide for us, these types of common issues. Our members are all of the national libraries that use Dewey. I think we're 11 or so. Well, they're listed right there, you can count, 9 or 11. And most major institutions in Europe that use Dewey. So we have a number of, or that they are called affiliated members. I think we have about 30 or so affiliated members. We meet once a year, various locations. I'll talk about the meetings in a little bit. Give the word to you first.
Well, the EDUG board is, of course, Elise as chair, Jean-Marie, who you see over there, as vice chair, and me as secretary. I used to be the chair and Elise the secretary, but we have sort of changed it. So, that's better? Yeah, good. We have an EDUG Web. This is the second generation, and we had another web before, and it's very, very good to have a web that we can update when we need to and give more information about EDUG and what we do. So if you go to the EDUG Web, you will find lots of information. This is the EDUG Web. You could see here you get different kinds of information. You get information about how to contact. You can either contact us by directly, and there is also, you can't see it, but down at the bottom you have an EDUG mail, sort of. But it's really easy to contact us. Well, we have information about how to become a member, members, the annual meetings, and we'll talk more about that later. We have also resources like mappings, things I'll talk more about, and we have also old things like the working groups that we started with can look at that. We started that Elise talked about, the law and things, so you would find information about that there. So if you're interested in EDUG, I encourage you to go to the EDUG Web and also to contact us. We used to have a forum at the EDUG Web because we wanted to be able to sort of have a discussion, not just having an informative web. But we didn't get a lot of traffic, so now OCLC has provided us with an email list we call the Dewey Translators Forum. And so far we have not done, well, heavily used, but I think it will become because it's really useful. EDUG is also an EPC member, Editorial Policy Committee member, since this year, and Elise is the member we sent to EPC. We became a corresponding member in 2017 and have been sort of advanced to become a regular member. And I think that's really, really good because then you can get the European perspective from a lot of countries. And even if we had, there was a European perspective in a way, it was the British Library, and as they do not do translations, they don't really have to think about the European perspective in the same manner, because it's really when you start translating, you have to think, what does this really mean? So it's really, really good. Another thing I want to talk about is the mapping projects that we're talked lots of things about mappings, mapping different kinds of subject heading systems to Dewey or other classification systems. And we had a meeting, the EDUG meeting 2015 in Naples. We talked about, we had a mapping workshop. You find information about that at our EDUG Web. And we came out with a recommendation for best practices for mapping. And I think that is really, really useful if you do mapping. So please go to that if you are doing mapping. You will get help. And now we should go this one. Good.
As mentioned, we meet once a year. We have various members that host the meetings. I think we've been through all the country hosts so far. We repeated with Switzerland this past year, and next year we'll be going to Stockholm. At our meetings, we have full-day symposium where we try to get presentations that reflect some common problems or some interesting developments that have been going on in Europe, and we also try to get at least one presentation on the current situation in whatever host country, whoever's hosting, how Dewey is used in that country. We also have a business meeting where the members gather to primarily discuss some of the problematic issues we're facing. I'll get back to that afterwards. And we have seminars. We used to have working groups. Now, the last few years, we've primarily had seminars where we try to, in smaller groups, discuss some of the larger issues at stake. So we're now going to give an overview of this past meeting in Bern.
And we had a very interesting presentation given by the Oslo University Library about the third part of their mapping project. They have done a lot of work when concerning mappings to Dewey with the subject headings and mappings, Dewey. And what I found was really interesting was that they have done end users studies. They have both looked at it at a qualitative and a quantitative way of studying. So it's a very thorough study where they started with a literary review, and they have looked, studied how students have done their searches. They have studied user logs. So they have, in many ways, studied what they're doing, and it's not, there's lots of things to do. I mean, because students really should have more help. But, I mean, it's really good to do an end-user study if you do a lot of work with mappings. Mapping is really a lot of work, and does it benefit end users? They will write a report on the project, and I have asked for it to be in Norwegian, in English, because even my Swedish colleagues do not really read Norwegian. I'm Norwegian. I think Norwegian is a very good language. I have no problems with that, but most people do not understand Norwegian, and I think this is a study, this project study is really interesting for people all over the world. Colleagues at Swedish librarians that were at the meeting working at the university libraries thought it was really, really interesting. We also had a very fascinating presentation about automatic classification at the DNB. We talked about that earlier EDUG meetings, but this time they had started really and had experience. So we could see what was working and what was not really working very well. And I think it's really interesting. And if you go to the EDUG Web, you will find these presentations so you can look at them more. As Elise said, we usually have a presentation about the host library, and this time it was the Swiss National Library. So we got an overview of their use of Dewey, as well as a history of really classification at the Swiss Library. So,
Peter Werling will present what's new in Dewey applications himself, so I'm not going to review that for you. And I recommend that you take a look at the Making Dewey Data Actionable presentation that was presented by Alex Kyrios at our meeting, but it was a presentation made by Stephen Schindeheste at OCLC. I don't dare to try to relay the details of it, but I do recommend taking a look at the presentation. Alex, feel free to jump in if I misrepresent anything when I talk about community involvement in Dewey development, possible models for collaboration, because this was a very interesting
presentation by Alex at EDUG, where we discussed potential ways that others or end users, other institutions, other libraries can help the OCLC editors in Dewey editorial work. And this was a presentation that continued the day after in a seminar where we discussed community involvement. And basically, Alex presented 5 different models for collaboration or community involvement. And the one that I can quickly list them. There's a traditional model where we would just make suggestions to the editors via email or by phone or in face. He suggested the task forces of existing committees like EDUG, for example, or other classification groups in different countries. He suggested librarian expert pairings where you have librarians at any institution working with experts in a field to develop Dewey schedules. There's a passive reception of suggestions, and there was also a suggestion about crowdsourcing that was sort of just thrown out into the air, but we didn't really discuss the details about it. The suggestion that we really liked a lot was this librarian expert pair idea. And in the ensuing discussion the day after, EDUG was pretty much in agreement that this is a really good way to go forward, but what we would need from the editors at OCLC is a framework or checklist for people who would like to develop the schedules in this way. So we had already a suggestion from Une Knudsen, who is unfortunately not here today, but many of you know. She knows of a librarian who would like to work with an expert in the field of geology, and they've been burning to try to develop Dewey because the geology in Dewey is a little bit too, it doesn't really suit the needs for the university library in Oslo. They would like to work on this, and now they're just waiting for OCLC to make a checklist so that they can formalize this work. The other main issue that we discussed at the seminars on day 2 is an issue that's very important for especially national libraries of Europe, and that's Dewey as linked data. Because this is, ever since Dewey.info was, I don't know what the polite way to say it, was taken down, I guess, we find that we need it. Or not ever since it was taken down, we find we need it. We loved it when it was there, and we've missed it sorely since then. More and more national libraries in Europe are moving towards an entity-based cataloging, whether it's in the form of actually making the jump to BibFrame or just adding URIs in our catalogs so that we can provide more information about the entities we're describing. For example, we add URIs from authority files for authors, and this allows machines to be able to say, oh wait, this author is the same person as that author over here, and we can also extract more information about this author using then authority files. This author was born at this date. He's also written these works. At the National Library of Norway, we're doing the same for works, so that anybody can look at, or anybody, a machine or a user can look at a catalog post and say, oh wait, this is a manifestation of this particular work, and at this library we have 5 other translations of this work in these languages. Providing more information to users. Problem with Dewey is that right now we're expending a lot of work in editing Dewey. I mean, the OCLC editors are doing a fantastic job adding terms to Dewey schedules. The Library of Congress is suggesting more terms as in words to Dewey numbers. Translators all over the world, or focusing on Europe, are translating these terms, but at the end of the day, catalogers, who are also a huge resource, spending a lot of resources cataloging, or classifying rather, they're writing a Dewey number onto the catalog post, and that Dewey number remains a string that is unintelligible to pretty much everyone. It's a string that is just used right now so that somebody can figure out where this book is supposed to go on the shelf. And it's becoming, a lot of our members are saying it's very difficult to defend the use of all these resources to use Dewey when all you get is a string. Yeah, so this is something that's been an ongoing discussion at EDUG. We wrote letters to OCLC in 2015, I believe, a few years ago, stating, National Library stating why we need linked data. These are, this is why we need them. We got a letter back saying we're working on it, and at this last meeting we decided we need to send more pressure because we haven't seen any results so far. So if any other countries that are represented here also have an interest in Dewey as linked data or Dewey information, please contact us, because then we can work together and hopefully make it happen.
And that's really important at the Swedish National Library, as we already have a linked data catalog. So, EDUG is also very important to meet people. You could say we usually have a Dewey dinner, and as you could see, we are really happy here in the picture. we enjoy meeting each other, and it's a very good way if you want to start collaborating, is that you know each other. It's much easier. So we usually have a dinner that's nice, and these are not from Bern. We had a lovely time in Bern, but this is from Paris last year, because my photos were better. And we also had a visit to the old National Library in Paris. And yes, you can see Jean-Marie here, for instance, in this picture. And Piero Carelli from, unfortunately not here, from Italy. So I could say that when I started in Sweden as a Dewey editor, it was really important to me to be able to go to EDUG and meet people to collaborate with, and that helps me enormously in my work as a translator and to update Dewey.
That's all we had to say.
Good.
So at the Library of Congress, my class.
They can't hear you.
Yeah, come on.
The linked data concept is a really good one. The Library of Congress, my classifiers spend an extraordinary amount of time making very long numbers. They build very long numbers. And in the United States, most of that gets cut off at the third or fourth digit. And it's strictly a shelving mechanism. And that, all that intellectual thought of what does that number actually mean or do is lost. So it's a string that is, again, a lot of intellectual thought, and it's not all well utilized. So I also feel strongly that it'd be great to have it as linked data.
We have the data. We have the metadata connected to the strings. We have it in, I don't know, 11 languages, but it's just sitting there. Yeah. And it's also unfortunate that in WorldCat, you can see the number at the very bottom hiding. If you're just looking at a WorldCat record, the Dewey number is all the way at the bottom as linked data, but is not linked. So it's hypertext, but it doesn't go anywhere. So that's also a little bit disappointing.
Do we have any more questions? Perhaps you could ask if do you need to be European to participate in EDUG?
My name is Peter Werling from Pansoft company, and today I'm here to discuss and show the technical updates in the Dewey software. And I would like to start with an overview of the entire Dewey software which is available. Most of you maybe are only working with WebDewey or do WebDewey, but there's much more Dewey software out there. So we have in the top center the ESS OCLC software, which holds the original English GUI content. And I try to describe some data workflow in this chart. As an example, I use the Norwegian GUI data. And as you can see from the ESS OCLC software, the English content goes to the software which we call distribution server. And the idea of the distribution server is it collects all the data from everywhere and provides it to all the other software. So first, the English content goes from the OCLC ESS system to the distribution server. And from the distribution server, you can see the content, the English content is going left to the translation software of the Norwegians. And you can see on the left side, there are much more instances of the translation software. So beside the Norwegian translation software, we also have the Italian, German, and much more. So after the content goes to the translation software of the Norwegian team make the translation from English to Norwegian of the GUI data. And from the translation software, the Norwegian translation software, that translated Norwegian content goes back to the distribution server. And from the distribution server, you can see there are a lot of arrows going to other directions. For instance, from the distribution server, you see the arrows to the right, where you see that the Norwegian content goes to the WebDewey. But there is also an arrow pointing back from WebDewey, from the Norwegian WebDewey back to the distribution server. So inside WebDewey, users are able now to create own GUI numbers and send them back first to the distribution server. And from there, from the distribution server, those user-generated numbers go back to the translation software on the left side. And especially in the Norwegian use case, as you already mentioned, we are talking about tens of thousands of numbers that are created inside WebDewey by users. And those are going back to the distribution server and the translation software. And in the translation software, if the numbers are good and you approve them, they will be part of the approved translation of the GUI data. And there is something new about the Norwegian translation process, because if you have a look on the bottom area, you see CC Mapper as a new product. So the CC Mapper, the Norwegian one, is supposed to create mappings from source vocabularies to GUI. In the Norwegian use case, we are talking about humor and realfagsthema. These two source vocabularies are mapped, and again, the result of that work is GUI content or mapping content, which goes back from the CC Mapper software back to the distribution server. And from the distribution server, this mapping automatically goes to WebDewey. So when you see inside WebDewey mappings, Norwegian mappings, they are coming out of the product CC Mapper. And the last arrow you see on the bottom area goes from the distribution server down to the WebDewey search product, the Norwegian one. So there's no arrow back, because in that direction it's going only in a single direction, and there's no content coming back from WebDewey search. So having this ecosystem of different GUI software, what is new in the last 12 months? So first thing which is new, we are talking about a new instance of the translation software for the Arabic team. So I'm very happy. We are in the middle of implementing the right to left support. So we got contracted to implement that. And there's also, when we talk about WebDewey instances, we will see in Arabic, right to left, WebDewey, real soon. In addition, the ESS software on OCLC side, Pansoft got contracted a few months ago to make a code review and make support for that software. So that means in the future, upcoming updates of the ESS OCLC software are implemented by Pansoft, which is pretty good for us because all the other software you see right here, distribution server, WebDewey, WebDewey Search, CC Mapper, translation software is already implemented by Pansoft. So what else is new? As I described, there's this product called CC Mapper for the Norwegian team, and it was implemented like 2 years ago. And just yesterday, I received from the German team from Göttingen that they have the final fundings to contract Pansoft to introduce a second instance of CC Mapper in Germany to use CC Mapper for mapping from RPK to Dewey. So we will see that, I would expect, in 2019 to have mappings for the German use case created by CC Mapper. So this is the big picture of new instances of Dewey software and what happened during the last 12 months. So now I would like to go into some details about what happens inside the software, the improvements of the software themselves. And I try to do that to show that on the real running software, so we will see if this will work out here in a live demo. So first thing I would like to show is the concept we needed for the German team to support German term is Kurznotation, which is like short notations. So for the automatic classification, the idea is to use not the full qualified Dewey numbers and use instead shorter numbers, to make it easier for the algorithms, the automatic algorithms, to find good Dewey numbers. So what they needed is a support inside the translation software to express that some numbers should be shortened and where to be shortened. And for that, we introduced in the translation software a feature which is enabled only for the German team, which allows to, in this example, for the number 004, express that some Dewey numbers should be shortened at that point, and other Dewey numbers should be shortened at another point. And so depending on different areas and how much information is available, the level of shortening can be different in different areas. And even if it's quite similar to segmentation, it's not exact segmentation. So they wanted to have their own possibility to set beside the segmentation additional short notation information. Inside the WebDewey software, we have a presentation which is very similar to segmentation. So actually, in this example for 004, you can see there is this backslash information that user can turn on and off, which expresses this is a short number and it's shortened at that location. And if I scroll down here a little bit, this is an example where you can see the backslash is the shorten number information, the forward slash is the segmentation information. So it can be at different points. In this example of 004.3, this is something like that, but it can also be at the same location, like here in that example on 004.9, expressed by the X, telling that segmentation information and shorten information is at the same place. If we have a look on the same number, in the WebDewey search product, we just added also in the same style the backslash information expressing that the number is shortened at that location. The next feature I would like to show is the statistics that we introduced lately. And for this, I would like to go to the Norwegian translation software. So inside the translation software, you have a statistics feature that shows you a lot of information related to how many Dewey numbers are on the English side, how much is untranslated, and this is the productive, so that's quite impressive. You have 0 untranslated records. That is really, really, really good. And 0 unpublished records. So actually I cannot show anything because you have done all your work. Yeah, perfect. And what we already noticed is that there are a lot of additional build numbers. In that use case, you have 17,000 build numbers, which exist only on the Norwegian side. They are all, or more or less, they are all created in WebDewey. I would expect more than 95% are first created in WebDewey, then contributed to the distribution server, and from the distribution server to the translation software, and here they are approved, and we see 17,000 Norwegian only records. Yeah. But at least you have some invalid records. But they're not really. I know. So this is a really interesting feature for the translation process because it allows the users to see if the data structure between the original English side and the translated side is different. We show them as invalid records. So if I, for instance, open that list and go to, for instance, that Dewey number, we introduced that feature that the structure and the Dewey numbers of the left side, of the original English left side, and of the right side is automatically compared. And whenever we find differences between the structure of the left side and the right side, we identify them and show them. So in that example, we automatically identify that the Dewey numbers used on the left side do not match the Dewey numbers used on the right side. And as you already said, we show them as invalid records because of that. But this is one of those use cases where this is not a bug, it's a feature, because you want to use different Dewey numbers on the right side because you want to express different examples compared to the original English side. So maybe one upcoming feature is to allow on that statistic page to express that special difference between left and right. It's not supposed to be invalid. It's supposed to be good and fine. And I mark that as being it's good and fine so that we can really make a difference between real, wrong, invalid records where there is the structure on the left side different from the right side. We want to make a difference in the future between those and examples like this one, where the Dewey numbers are by purpose different because you want to show different examples. So let's talk about more features. The next change in the translation software we implemented is the handling of the so-called is caption. Let me find that example again. So far, the translation software was not able to support the caption functionality of build numbers. So build numbers were changed with the introduction a few years ago when we switched the data format to mark XML, or OCLC switched the data format to the mark XML. At that time, the handling of build numbers was changed, and they introduced the concept of expressing for a build number for all the different relative index entries, being able to express which one of those should be used as the caption. And we show that with icons. So for this build number 001.0601, we have 3 relative index entries, and you should not use the very first one, which was the original implementation before we changed that. Instead, the user can now specify which of the 3 relative index terms can be used as the caption for that build number. And you can express that just by clicking the star, which shows which one is used as the caption. So next feature to show is the print feature inside WebDewey. So in WebDewey, we allow in the future to make small prints. We've introduced a new button, and if you use that button to print, you can create for small amounts of Dewey data. You can create PDF files which are supposed to be well formatted and should be exactly formatted like the printed edition. And the upcoming new features, we have made a lot of improvements together with OCLC about the number building engine. And I expect pretty soon we will see an install of the OCLC WebDewey, including that new number building engine rules and features. So we would expect after that it's still not 100%, but we are much better with the number building engine, which comes with WebDewey as we are now. And this is supposed to be an install coming up in September, I would expect. And after we have installed it for the OCLC WebDewey, we will roll out to all other instances with the same new feature. Besides that, we have in 2 new features where we have been contracted for. The translation software will have a new advanced search feature in the future in the update list. Thanks, Elise, for contracting us about that. And the German team contacted us for improvements for comments a while ago, which we are finishing now. This is what you can expect in the near future. Okay, so that's it about my presentation. Any questions?
Should I go? So since you're here, I'll ask you. Talking about the number building engine, all the numbers that I've wanted to contribute, built but couldn't do anything with, so they're sitting there, but I don't have a way to collocate them. They're sitting there, in my view, and maybe they're at the institution view, but is there any way for me to search on them, to find them, so that I could eventually send them for contribution? Does that question make sense?
Actually, maybe you try to repeat it. I'm not really sure if I got it.
So, I mean, I could log into my WebDewey and show you I have all these numbers that I've tried to build, have built them, save them for personal or institution, but I haven't been able to contribute them.
Okay.
And I don't know how to, so I have all these numbers and they're all over, but I don't know how to get them to send. Yeah.
Okay, I can answer that question. So the contribution feature is supported in all instances except the OCS one. And but the good part about it is we are in the middle of doing the ESS code review at the moment, and it's one of the tasks after we take over the ESS code, after we are able to implement ESS code, which is the editorial system. One of the features OCS already asked is to support the contribution of user-generated build numbers back to the editorial system. So for the other instances, that part to make the contribution out of WebDewey to the distribution server and to translation software is implemented so they can use it. But because OCS is using the ESS software, and that part of the software does not support contribution right now. This is why it's not supported at this time.
But how can I find all the ones I've already created? Do I have to find them in?
Actually,
when it's working?
Yeah, if this part is working, we just introduced the feature of searching by username for. This is not part of the OCS WebDewey instance, which is up and running at the moment. Actually, the last install for the OCS WebDewey is a few years ago, but we just introduced last year that feature to be able to search by username, which would be, I mean, exactly what you need. So you could search for build numbers with your personal ID and would get the entire list of them. Okay. More questions?
I am all the way from Nepal. I would like to extend my number, Nepal 95496. Because it is given by DDC since the introduction of the DDC scheme. But you know, like in India, the number after 954 has given the state numbers for Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, etc. But for Nepal, we have not received except 95496. So we would like to expand this number. And I think it is the political structure of Nepal has been changed now. The whole Nepal has been divided in three structures, I think. The provinces, districts, and village level. So in the provinces, there are 7 provinces now. It is already divided, the whole structure of Nepal, under 7 provinces. But they have not yet provided name of the provinces. And what I would like to request you here is to provide us only the number for these 7 provinces after 95496. Then the name I will send you later on while communicating with DDC offices. So that is my questions. As other countries, we should get this number expansion, because the same number has been given since the beginning of DDC scheme. I was in charge of technical section in the Tribhuvan University Central Library, where I worked for 25 years. So I know many things about DDC and also CIP. So this is my request for expansion of Nepal number. Thank you.
Can everyone hear that this is Alex Kyrios again? Okay. I don't think I have a very good connection here, so there were some parts of that were difficult to hear, but if you are asking for subdivisions for Nepal, we would very much like to work with you on that. You might speak with Julianne Beal, who is there, to get our contact information. You can also just email us at dewey@oclc.org. So yes, we would like to provide some development for Nepal. Another option would be that there are geographic divisions that are approved Dewey numbers that may just show up in the areas that they are needed. For example, Italy has more detailed notation for places in Italy than what your average American user would see in WebDewey, but we work with the Italians to make sure that those fit into Dewey and that those numbers are fully valid. So just as you might see some numbers in Dewey, such as U.S. counties, that you would not find yourself needing in Nepal, for example, we can work with you and figure out something that that serves your community's needs, and see where we can put that into Dewey for everyone to see as well.
We've got another comment coming up here.
Okay.
Hello. It's our golden opportunity to stand here and share our information. I want to also expand the number. 298 is the optional number in DV, and I have written a thesis in my Master in Library Science in 5th March 2005. So I got the permission from the OCLC in the following date also. So there is so many Sathya Sai Baba literature in the world. There are 126 countries. There are 1,200 Sathya Sai Samitis. There are so many Sai literature in the Sai libraries, and I found that it is very difficult to classify all the literature. So I have expanded the number under the optional number in DV, that is 298. So I request all this golden forum to expand the number in Sathya Sai Baba's literature. If you give us the permission, I will expand all the number in my thesis already also. Thank you so much.
Yes, we would be interested to see what you have done. I think we will probably want to leave that option for other libraries to do as they would like. And there's also an exhibit coming from this meeting that Rebecca Green worked on that shows different notation in religion if one takes the option to not have so much Christianity in there, including what Christianity numbers would look like in such a scheme. So that's also an area that we would very much like to see what you've done and to have suggestions. I hope you'll send those to us.